For 10 brutal years, the Greek armies had laid siege to the city of Troy. Their greatest warriors had fallen, their ships littered the beaches, and still, the city's mighty walls seemed absolutely impenetrable. Then, one morning, the Trojan sentries looked out and saw the impossible. The Greek camp was empty. The army was gone. It seemed they had finally given up and sailed for home. But they left something behind. Standing alone on the sand was a truly astonishing sight. A colossal wooden horse. It's probably the most famous trick in all of history. The Trojans, celebrating the end of the war, dragged the massive gift into their city, and in doing so, sealed their own doom. But what if the horse itself was the biggest trick of all? A powerful metaphor hiding a much more believable and fascinating truth? What if the most famous part of the story, the horse, never existed at all? The legend and its literary roots. The story we all know is pure drama. The overjoyed Trojans debate what to do with this strange offering. A priest named Laocoon famously warns them, "I fear the Greeks, even those bearing gifts." But nobody listens. The prophetess Cassandra, who is cursed to see the future but never be believed, also pleads with them, but her warnings fall on deaf ears. Convinced the horse is a sacred offering to the goddess Athena, the Trojans make a fatal choice. To get the monument inside, they're forced to tear down a section of their own unbreakable walls. That night, with the city lost in drunken celebration, the belly of the beast opens. An elite force of Greek warriors, led by the mastermind Odysseus, slips out. They kill the sentries, open the main gates, and signal the Greek army, which was just hiding behind a nearby island. The full might of the Greeks pours into the sleeping city. It's not a battle, it's a massacre. Troy is sacked and burned to the ground. The 10-year war ends in a single night, all thanks to a giant wooden horse. It's an incredible story, but where does it actually come from? Most people think of Homer's epic, the Iliad, but here's the first major surprise. The Iliad, the definitive account of the Trojan War, actually ends before the city falls. It concludes with the funeral of the Trojan hero Hector and never even mentions the horse. The horse is only briefly mentioned in Homer's other epic, the Odyssey, where it's treated as a story people already knew. The most famous and detailed version of the story comes much, much later, from the Roman poet Virgil in his epic poem, the Aeneid. Written over 700 years after Homer, Virgil's story is told from the Trojan point of view. He's the one who gives us the dramatic speeches, the Greek trickster Sinon left behind to sell the lie, and all the gory details of the city's fall. His version became so popular that it cemented the literal image of a giant horse in our collective imagination. So the most iconic part of the Trojan War story doesn't come from the main Greek source, but from a later Roman retelling with its own political agenda to create a founding myth for Rome. It's basically a literary game of telephone. That alone should make us question what we think we know. Is it possible that the stories were preserving the memory of something else, something that got warped over time into the fable of the wooden horse? The scholarly consensus today is that while Troy was very real, the Trojan horse was almost certainly a myth, but a myth that may have sprouted from a very real seed of truth. The investigation. Theory 1. The siege engine. So, if there wasn't a literal horse, what was there? The most popular and logical theory is that the Trojan horse was a metaphor for a type of siege engine. This isn't just a modern guess. Even ancient writers thought the literal story was a bit much. The Greek geographer Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century AT, said that believing in a literal horse was to attribute utter silliness to the Trojans. He argued that the horse was actually a contrivance to make a breach in the Trojan wall. In other words, a battering ram. In the late Bronze Age, military tech was getting more advanced. Armies were developing tools to break through stone walls, most commonly the battering ram or the siege tower. These weren't just logs. They were complex machines on wheels, often with a protective roof to shield the soldiers inside from arrows and stones. And this is where the horse metaphor clicks into place. It was common in the ancient world, especially for the Assyrians, to name their war machines after animals. And what were these giant wooden structures covered with to protect them from fire arrows? Wet, uncured animal hides. The most common animal hide available would have been from horses. Imagine it from the Trojan perspective. A massive, wheeled wooden structure, maybe with a ram's head on the front, covered in glistening horse hides, pushing towards your walls. It would have looked like some monstrous horse, built to break down your city. As Dr. Armand Yanger of Oxford University notes, the fable was perhaps inspired by the way ancient siege engines were clothed with damp horse hides to stop them being set alight. So the story of soldiers hiding inside the horse? That could be a poetic twist on the reality of soldiers being protected inside the machine's armored shell as they attacked the walls. Let's talk geology. The real-life site of Troy sits near the North Anatolian Fault, a seismically active zone. And the archaeology of the site tells a fascinating story. The layer known as Troy Vi, which many scholars link to the powerfully fortified city of the Late Bronze Age, shows clear evidence of destruction, not from war, but from a massive earthquake around 1300 BC. The walls show signs of toppling, consistent with a major seismic event. Okay, so we have a real earthquake that damaged Troy's famous walls. But what does that have to do with a horse? The connection is a god, Poseidon. In Greek mythology, Poseidon was the god of the sea, but he was also the god of horses, and crucially, the god of earthquakes. He was known by the title Earthshaker. The horse was his sacred animal. This interpretation aligns with the archaeological evidence for Troy V's destruction and explains the gift element of the myth in a very clever way. The investigation. Theory 3. The naval ruse. There's a third theory that brings us back to human trickery, but on the water instead of land. This idea suggests the horse was actually a metaphor for a ship,